Welcome to the Living Your Greatness podcast. I am your host, Ben Mummy. The purpose of the podcast is to inspire millions of people across the world to achieve greatness and enhance their overall personal well-being. Living Your Greatness is becoming the go-to resource that CEOs, elite athletes, professional coaches, and entrepreneurs rely on to upgrade themselves. The podcast helps you master the best of what other people have already figured out. So I gladly invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy tuning in to today's episode. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Living Your Greatness. This is your host, Ben Mummy, and today we have a new guest to the show, and his name is George Couros. So for those of you that don't know George, he is an innovative teaching, learning, and leadership consultant and author of the Innovator's Mindset. George has worked at all school levels from K to 12 as a teacher, technology facilitator, and he is currently an instructor with the Graduate School of Education of the University of Pennsylvania. George believes in creating collaborative environment and stakeholders to help meet the best needs of children. George is a father of 2 children and is driven to ensure that all students have an amazing experience in their K to 12 schooling. So George, welcome to the show. It is a pleasure to have you with us today, man.
Hey, it's awesome. And actually every time like I share that bio out, I seem to have another kid. So we actually just had another son. So we're up to 3 kids now. So we had a son born in just a couple months ago, and his name's Marino. And just, I feel like a pretty blessed dad living here in Florida. It's been pretty wonderful.
Congratulations to your family and that it's growing. And I appreciate you for giving that update. So George, let's kind of get rolling here. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Where did you spend your formative years growing up? And what inspired you to become a teaching, learning, and leadership consultant, as well as best-selling author of The Innovator's Mindset?
I actually attribute a lot of the things I've done today to where I grew up. I grew up in a small town, and many people in Canada, unfortunately, know it for not the best reasons, Humble, Saskatchewan, right? And you know, the tragedy that happened with the Humble Broncos. And it was interesting because when that happened, as horrific as it was, I'm like, well, if there's a town that can handle this, it'd be Humboldt. And I grew up, I'm very close with my high school friends who we all played sports together, still connected to this day. We talk a ton. And I always joke with my wife, she grew up in Edmonton, Alberta, where we lived, up until basically a few months ago, that every time, there's someone on TV that does something great, I'm like, that person's from Humboldt, right? And she was like, seriously? I'm like, yeah. And I always say excellence inspires excellence, right? And I just bug her about that. And I don't know if you know Jared Bednar. He was the coach of the Colorado Avalanche. They just won the Stanley Cup. And I milked that for all it's worth, right? And so we lived in this very small town. I think it's technically a city now, but it's got to be the smallest city probably in Canada. And we just grew up, and people were like constantly pushing each other, and wanting to do well, and really attribute a lot to that. And then I actually went to school at the University of Saskatchewan. Took me 6 years to get a 4-year degree in education, because I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And we just went to college because you were told you should go to college, not necessarily what you should do after college, but college was important. And something that I challenge right now, really kind of how do we help kids not go to college, but help find success in a way that's meaningful to them. That to me those are 2 different things. And so I actually, weirdly enough, was inspired by the movie Billy Madison. That made me want to become a teacher, because I'm like, that looks fun. And I've basically taught every grade level. I've been a school administrator. I've worked in central office. And then, I just started sharing some of my thoughts and ideas on social media. And then people started saying, you should come speak here. I'm like, what are you talking about? And they're like, yeah, no, we'd love for you to speak at our school, at our district. I'm like, all right, that sounds like something I'd be interested in doing. And they're like, well, what's your fee? I'm like, oh, you're going to pay me for this? Really? So I accidentally kind of fell into what I was doing today. And I've written several books. And if you would ask me when I graduated high school, do you see yourself becoming an author? I would have told you, like, you'll be lucky if I read a book, because I hated reading as a kid, because we were asked to read books that we weren't interested in. And I really do have a love of reading now. And I only started writing because as a principal, we were trying to figure out how do students create their own digital portfolios. And what does that look like? And so we were trying to teach something we never learned. So I'm like, well, you know what? If I'm going to be a good example, I'm going to go myself first and figure this out. So I started doing that, and it was like, wow, there's a lot of opportunities for kids here, but I like doing this. This is actually really, sharpening my own thinking. And so that just kind of turned into books and, help promote speak. I never set out to do what I was doing today, but I can't imagine doing anything else now, which is really, really weird. And yeah, it's given us lots of opportunities. And as Ben and I were talking before the podcast, we just moved to Florida about a few months ago, and partly is because most of my work is in the US and we live in Orlando, and Magic Kingdom, there's direct flights where actually my mom's flying out here next week, and there's even a direct flight from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan to Orlando, Florida on Fridays. And so it's really easy for me to get where I need to go for speaking events and consulting opportunities. And as mentioned, family is everything to me. And so it's not just about ease of getting places. It's less time on the road and more time at home, which I think was really a big shift for me during COVID. So yeah, that's kind of, a little bit of my story and what I'm doing today. But everything I try to do is to help kids and other people, and, wanting my family, my kids to have, a future they can really not only look forward to, but they create themselves. I think that really is important to me.
Thanks for giving us that background of your story. And it's definitely like a very humbled beginning, like kind of like you said, you were passionate, you had these ideas, you were using technology as a tool, to empower and inspire others. And then with time, yeah, that kind of evolved into other things that, you obviously were not expecting, right? I'm also sure that my listeners enjoyed hearing it too, but hearing also that you're like a father first mentality, and that you apply that not only to your children, but also like the children of all. So kind of having like a greater purpose.
I think Ben, actually, like COVID was a big, I know it was horrible for some people, and I understand that. It was a big eye-opening thing for me. I traveled all over the world, and then all of a sudden I'm home, and it took me a few months to realize like I'm home, but I'm not really here. Like my head is always in other places. So I really utilize that time, and not only to become more invested as a dad, but also taking care of myself. I don't know if you know this, but like during COVID, I lost about 125 pounds. So really kind of got my health back in check. And and so like part of it was like, hey, these things are, and I've written a book about innovation. And I remember the first day that COVID, like basically stopped everything that I was doing. And I was like, what the heck am I going to do? And then the next day I'm like, look, I wrote a book on innovation. If I can't figure this out, we're in trouble. So like, I need to like kind of walk the walk. And so, yeah, it's really changed a lot of things for me. And as I said, like my career was everything to me before, and now it's an important thing, but my family is everything, and everything is centered around that. And that's, kind of what I learned through that, continue to learn through that experience. I try to be the best at I can be, but that's also like a thing that we tend to learn and grow in as well.
I love that. Use that opportunity, right, when COVID happened, to keep that innovator mindset, which we're going to go into today, and apply to your own lifestyle, right? With your family goals, with your health goals, probably also with your professional goals, which we could get into later. But George, that actually leads me kind of like to my next question is, I want my listeners to get a better understanding of what is an innovator mindset and what it is not. How would you define an innovator mindset? And if you could provide us an example.
Sure. Like, so for example, when I talk about innovation, a lot of people associate that word strictly with technology. So even if you look at like schools and districts, they'll have, director of innovation, but typically that was the director of technology, just changing the name, and nothing really changed about the role. And so years ago, I actually became the division principal of innovative teaching and learning for my school district. And at the time, nobody was talking about innovation in schools. And nobody had that title, nothing like it. So part of my job was to figure out, what does this even mean? And so really, when we look at innovation, it's about doing new and better things. And so a lot of times when we talk about innovation, or when other people talk about innovation, they're talking about new things, right? Not necessarily better. And so we said it's really important to kind of identify what actually makes us better about what we were doing in the past, or, and it's not necessarily totally brand new things. It could be iteration or invention. So for example, the first iPhone was an incredible innovation. But if I gave you the first iPhone right now and made you trade in whatever you have, you'd be like, are you kidding me? Like, why would you give me this? Right. So there's innovations that are happening every single model of the iPhone. So that's an iteration as that process. So like even like part of it too is really kind of immersing yourself in the learning process. And we're recording this in December of 2022. And like literally last night, I'm sure you've seen some of it online. People are like utilizing Chat GPT, right? And they're, basically AI can write stuff for you, give you answers, making you lists, like I saw a TikTok that was really interesting. Somebody had actually utilized that to say like, hey, I have fussy kids, give me a meal plan for the week, right? And so it wrote out a meal plan, and then say, put it in a table form. So then it puts it right in a table form, and then it said, make the grocery list for me to actually fulfill this thing. And it did all of this thing, right? Literally in seconds. So a lot of people are going to be freaked out by this, right? Because like it's going to be super easy for kids to cheat and do essays. But I think part of it for me, I saw it, and a lot of people are going to freak out by it, but they're not going to necessarily jump into it and figure it out themselves. So last night I started just using it and trying to figure out like, how would this actually leverage? And I've been blogging for years, and I was actually writing a blog post on a book that I'm reading called The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. And I wrote a little bit, and I said, give me a quick summary of this book. And so it just wrote a summary, and some of it was like right, some of it was wrong. And so I adjusted. I actually took it, and I'm like writing a blog post about it right now and saying like, hey, I asked Chat GPT for a summary. This is what it shared with me. And so it was interesting. It gave me kind of a point for him. And because I've written so much, I said, write the summary in the same style of George Couros. So it probably went through my blog, saw how I wrote, and the summary is very different based on how I write. So now a lot of people are going to be freaked out by this. And I think that there obviously is some concern because you can cheat. Like I'm going to write in my blog post like that, like exactly what I just told you of how I went through that process. And so for me, it is a really interesting thing, but it could actually make us dumber, right? Because like, why would I read the book if I do this? Now I am reading the book. So I think part of it's saying like, hey, this is a really easy way for me to kind of get like the kind of like the basics of this book in a really quick way to write this out. But I have to now make a personal connection so people know, hey, there's no way AI could have done this part, what he's talking about. How do you make these stories? So it's like, how do you utilize some of these new things to actually do better stuff? Like it saved me a bunch of time on one end, but if we're just using it to say like, why would I even write an essay right now? What we're giving up is we might be, taking knowledge, but we're giving up wisdom. And so I think it's like saying like, how do we actually use some of these things that are actually, heading our way to actually spend our time in ways that we can create more value. So like when I was a kid, we had an Apple IIc. Now I'll tell you, this is a really weird thing to say. I actually think when I was an 8-year-old kid, I was way better with technology than I am today because technology has become so easy that basically anyone can use it. Like anyone listening to this, if you have an iPhone, nobody remembers pulling out the how to use this booklet with the iPhone because there wasn't one, because they made it so easy to use that basically there's like 3 buttons and you just press them and figure out what happens. But when I was a kid on an Apple IIc, you actually had to know how to program for anything to work on that computer. So when we actually have a ton of information, we have this like just inundating with that, with this. And one of the things I share in the book, it's not actually what you know that matters. It's what you do with what you know. And that's where the innovator's mindset comes in, is how do we actually take all of these ideas? How do we take the stuff that we're sharing and actually create something better as we move forward, right? And it's not ignoring the technology, but leveraging it to create better stuff. It's about taking knowledge, information. Like anyone listening to this podcast, you might be getting some ideas. Are you just going to soak them in and then walk away and do nothing with it? Or are you going to maybe do a YouTube response, a quick reflection video? Because that will actually deepen your learning if you just listen to it. What will you create with what we're sharing right now? And I think that's really the embodiment of the innovator's mindset to me.
I love that. And I love that example that you brought of, just one outlet of getting knowledge, like with technology. And then also acknowledging that we have to tie that still into wisdom and personal experience to make it more meaningful and to make it better. So I appreciate that. And I'm totally in agreement. What are 8 characteristics of an innovator's mindset? And are there any stories that you would like to share from innovative legends, heroes, or giants?
Yeah, well, I'm not going to share all 8 with you. You're like testing me on my own stuff. Like the one I'm going to focus on is really kind of the notion of empathy, right? And empathy is really kind of understanding the experience of others and really kind of looking backwards. But it really kind of ties in to this other characteristic. And a lot of people, when I actually share those 8 characteristics, they think they're kind of like separated, but they're all connected with one another. So another one of them is not only being problem solvers, but problem finders, actually identifying things that are really meaningful to you and how you actually utilize them. How do you actually find problems that are meaningful to you and then create the solutions, right? And so I think about that, a lot of the people in the world right now, and I don't know if I can think of one off the top of my head, are taking some of these ideas and they're creating a better way, right? And so like there's actually a student, her I can't remember her name off the top of my head, but she actually went to visit some family in a country that actually was dealing with poverty, extreme poverty, and people don't have access to things that we actually take for granted, like clean water, electricity. So what did she do? She actually created a $5 energy device that anyone in the world could access. So really, really cheap. And so she identified this issue and kind of understood, like, what are people actually dealing with this and how can I best help them? So what we're really trying to do is actually, how do we actually help our kids understand in our schools? And like, I know this sounds weird, maybe a little bit cliche. Like I think a lot of times we look to, celebrities and, and to me, I'm a huge basketball fan, but because you can play basketball, it doesn't make you any more relevant or better than, a kid in school that can make a huge impact in the world that doesn't get the same attention or notice as a LeBron James or someone like that. And so how do we actually get kids to understand that they can have a tremendous impact like on the world right now? Because we always say like, hey, we're developing the leaders of tomorrow. And you're kind of subtly saying to kids, you can't actually make an impact in the world until you leave. Like then you can start. But like here, you got to just do school stuff, right? And even there's another student. I just, my brain is just turned off right now. Maybe I'm using Chat GPT too much. So this kid actually, a lot of schools focus on cyberbullying, right? Like, and basically setting the lowest bar possible for kids. Like, as long as you don't bully people, we're happy, right? And somebody said, well, if you can use this to be horrible, why can't you use it to be awesome? So this kid actually started the social media accounts in the school to compliment kids, to talk about how great students are. Totally changed the culture. But then other students around the world say like, hey, if that kid can do it, why can't I? And started their own accounts and started spreading around the world. So I think a lot of times what we try to do is we get people to look at some of these characteristics and then see them in the celebrities or the entrepreneurs of the world, but actually not really see how this can be developed in our kids right now, and how not only can it be developed in our kids, but there's kids already doing this. And so my passion is really, how do we get our kids to see that this is something that's inside them right now, that they can make a significant impact, whether it's in their local community, in the global community, not only on their lives, but in the lives of others. And I think we got to start really kind of pointing more, to the people in our communities as opposed to outside, because a lot of times we glorify politicians, glorify celebrities, and we ignore people in our own communities. And I think that's one of the reasons I'm so proud of like Humboldt, is that you have this small town that people know for a tragedy, but I know it for greatness. I know it for people coming together. I know it for people doing amazing things because of that community, right? And spreading it around the world. And I think that's what we're trying to do in my work right now.
I love that. I love that. And that also focuses on, not putting people on a pedestal, bringing out the leader that we already are within. And I know leadership is a big part of your work. But something that I want to pinpoint that I really liked was you talked about like curiosity of children, right? Like they're curious, they have potential, it's already within them. It doesn't need to be tomorrow, it could be now. And we also know too, just like how creative children are when they're younger, all the ideas they have, but they're not always putting it into action, right? They're holding back, kind of like you said, with the education system that we're sometimes in. So a question that I have for you is like, how can we respond to a child's natural curiosity and help them, empower them to wonder, to explore, and become a forward-thinking leader?
Well, actually, I got a good story from this morning, which is, this was not planned at all. So this morning, we have it's like Elf on the Shelf, or no, what is it? Like the elves that come
Oh,
visit, right? And
yeah.
my daughter's like super into it. She gets up every morning to see what the elves are doing. And so
Nice.
one of the elves actually said, and she's 6, right? One of the elves said, uh, "Hey, I'm really sick today. Can you draw me a picture to help me feel better?" Right? So, uh, daughter's 6 years old. She gives it to me. She's like, "Can you read this?" And I said, "No, no, no. You're gonna read it." So, like, she's getting better as a reader. And so I had to do a couple things, and she's just sitting there at the table. And I said, "Well, how come you're not drawing?" She's like, "Well, I don't know what to draw." I said, "Here's the thing. This is what separates dad and some other people. Dad just jumps in. He'll he figures it out. He doesn't overthink it. And sometimes what we do is we think and think and think and think, and then we don't actually do. And we were talking about I was reading a book recently, or I was actually listening to a book on one of my runs, and it was unf yourself. I won't say the actual word, but it basically said, like, thoughts don't define you, your actions do. And really kind of saying, like, hey, like, you will be fine. Just start drawing, see what happens. And I think what happens a lot of times in education is that if kids don't get it right or do it perfect the first time, they get hammered for it, and then they start overthinking it. They started, losing confidence in themselves. Whereas if you just go and you just start, you'll figure it out along the way. And I think a lot of times we hold ourselves back because, I just got to sit on this for a little bit. I got to think a little bit more about this, where actually we just kind of got to go and figure out along the way. And that's what you want to develop in your kids, is really that ability to just kind of move forward. And it doesn't mean they're not going to make mistakes. It doesn't mean that what they're going to do the first time is going to be perfect. But, a bad action is sometimes better than no action, right? And so I'm trying to get, my daughter to think this way. And that was like a really good example from this morning. And, 2 minutes after I said that, she's got this awesome picture. She tells me why she explained it. She just started drawing. She just started going. And I think if you think about it too much, that's when we tend to hold ourselves back, because we can always think about all the things that we don't want to do or all the things that could go wrong, as opposed to like, what could go right? I'm just going to start going.
I love that example because good or bad mistakes,
Mhm.
it's experience, right? And it's action, kind of like you said, and it helps better you, right? It helps you get better. And something that I'm also thinking about, when we think about our children, which I know this is, an audience that you're having a huge impact on, it's not just educators, but also coaches or parents or influencers these days, right? There's so much social media and technology
Mhm.
that our children see. How can we all be better allies at encouraging them to foster innovation, critical thinking, and inspiring creativity?
Yeah, like when you're talking about specifically with influencers, because that's something that a lot of people are dealing with and having issues with, and kids are seeing their self-esteem go down because they're comparing themselves. And I'll use a Canadian analogy, TSN, right? Like, you got TSN Sports Center, we got ESPN up here, right? And basically what everyone's watching on social media is like the best of the highlights, like TSN Sports Center. They don't show the whole game; they show you the best parts of the game. And so when you think that's the whole world, when you think everyone only has the best of, then of course you're going to be insecure with this, right? And so what we're really trying to get kids to focus on is really, you have to like be able to like understand yourself and understand who you are. And I'm reading 4 Agreements right now, and it talks about this notion of like, basically, don't take anything personal. Like, people are going through their own things, and really kind of understanding, um, you know, like, sometimes when someone says something negative to you, it's not a you thing, it's a them thing. And we have to understand that, but we have to actually be able to like kind of understand ourselves and understand that too, is like, hey, this is actually, this is what someone else is showing you as their best parts, but they have bad parts of the day. Like, you'll never, my wife and I, we fight, but I don't post about like, oh my God, my wife is being horrible this morning. Like, I don't talk about that, because I'm respectful of her and, respectful of our relationship, but it's not like it doesn't actually happen. And so really we have to help kids not to worry about what someone else is doing. And maybe someone's bragging about something because they need they need to shine their light. You're right, at that moment. Maybe they're going through some insecurity. Maybe they're really proud of an achievement. Why shouldn't they be? But it doesn't lessen anything that you're doing, right? And so really, I think part of it is really working with our kids to understand that they have to be able to judge their own value based on themselves, not based on what they see elsewhere, not based on what, some other kid is doing. And part of the thing that I think I'm really pushing back on in schools is we're trying to get kids to be good at all of the same things, as opposed to how do we help kids find what they're good at and really kind of finding that passion, that potential. And it's like, we want all kids to be good at math. I'm like, I don't. Some kids don't want to be good at math. Why are you forcing them to do that? That kid who's really good at math, yeah, pursue math. Math is important. But this other kid just isn't passionate about it. So of course we got to identify what is really important that they understand. But are we developing that kid as an artist? Are we developing that kid as an athlete? Are we developing that kid as, going into something that doesn't need college, right? And being excited about that. And so we create a lot of scenarios where we compare ourselves because the adults are defining success for our kids, as opposed to teaching the kids, you define success for yourselves, just like I do, right? Like no matter what you do, you can be totally successful. I can be totally successful, but our measurements are totally different. But then with our kids, we actually put them all together in the same bunch. And then if they don't measure up to one another, that determines their success. And we're like, why are you comparing yourselves to influencers? Like, well, you've been doing this to me in high school for like 10 years, right? Like this has been forever. So like really teaching a kid that you have to be able to, live with you, and you have to like judge your own actions and inaction based on you. Don't worry about what other people are doing. You can learn from them, but don't actually compare yourselves to them.
There's so much I want to unpack because I feel like you said a lot of key aspects there of, how they could foster that creativity, how they can make that mindset shift. That's actually somewhere where I want to go next, is in terms of the mindset. So I know that you believe that innovation is all about mindset and not a skill set. And you kind of shared earlier on in like your personal life, how you've done it with family, during COVID. You've also shared with how you've done it, with your fitness. But how can someone listening to this podcast, develop a growth mindset to inspire the ability or motivation and attitude to unleash their hidden talents?
Yeah, and it's actually interesting because like I talk about growth mindset in the book Innovator's Mindset, and it's something that schools have really focused on, right, for years. My contention with growth mindset is that it's important, but it's actually not enough. That the innovator's mindset is actually not only it's the next step of this, right? Because growth mindset sometimes is used in schools as like a nice form of compliance. Like, hey, if you just believe you can be good at math, then you're more likely to be good at math. And you're like, well, I hate math, right? So, but it's a kind of like a leverage thing too, right? And so my focus is, how do you actually get kids not just to understand math, but to do something with the math they're learning, to actually see the value of it. And so there's a gentleman named Dan Meyer, and like I didn't like math at all, right? And he actually, so I'm a huge basketball guy. We've talked about, you can see the Orlando Magic stuff behind me right now. And he does this thing where he would actually do videos of him shooting a basketball, and he would actually do angles to actually say, like, is this ball going to go in based on the angle and things like this. If you did that to me when I was a kid, I would have been interested, right? But if you actually gave me the opportunity to, like, okay, you're going to go make the video, you're going to actually talk about this, then that's where that really kind of goes into that next level, right? Because a lot of times we're creating the stuff for our kids, not necessarily getting them to see the value of it. And part of it is actually not just kind of getting a kid interested in the content area, but actually having the ability to create something in that area. So for example, I show this example a lot. There is we have kids in our schools. Like if you ask anybody, if I said to a school, how many of you want to be YouTubers or, TikTok stars? Half kids' hands would go up in schools, right? But then we're like, yeah, but I got to teach science. And so I show this video of this kid who debunks the notion of 0 calories. And he says, basically, this is what 0 calories is. Here's why it doesn't work the way we want it to work, right? And he goes on, he knows it inside out. He explains it. His knowledge in the area is so well versed because he has to explain it to the entire world. So when I have teachers saying to me, well, that's cool that kids doing a YouTube video, but I got to teach science. I'm like, why don't you get the kid, excuse me, take the science curriculum, take some of the elements of there in science and actually create a YouTube video, use their passion to really get an in-depth knowledge of the content area. So they might never go into science, but I understand you still have to do your job. People aren't going to mark this kid or assess how well you're as a teacher because of how good their YouTube video is. But if they use their excitement and passion about creating that video to actually have a deep understanding of science, not only are you going to do well as a teacher, but you also have the kid who's developing and furthering a passion that they're excited about while also learning science, right? And there's like, it's not the curriculum or innovation, it's actually how you connect the two and really through the students. And so I talk about this quite a bit. And I use this as an example, and this is going to sound weird at the beginning, but it makes a lot of sense. I actually work in the United States. Now, I've worked in the US for 15 plus years, but I lived in Canada. But because I speak in different states, the reality of it is I actually have to file taxes in every state I speak in. I have to file taxes federally. I have to file taxes in Canada. I have to file taxes in every province I speak in. And here's the thing with the IRS, and the IRS is a lot more strict than CRA, right? Like if you lie about your taxes, you can go to jail in the United States. It's not the same in Canada. You'll get a fine, but you're not going to jail. So I can never say to the IRS, hey, IRS, I'm really about empowering and innovation. So I actually haven't filled out your form this year, but I did a really cool YouTube video and I'm explaining my taxes. They were like, no, you got to fill out the form. So it's not like there's no compliance in the world, right? There's compliance in all of our lives. And so do I love filling out tax forms every year? No, I hate it. It is a pain, but I do it. And one of the reasons I do it is because I truly could not imagine doing a different job than what I do. I love my job so much. And so the reason I use this example and explain it this way is when I ask teachers, I'm like, do your kids see schools as constant IRS tax forms, or are they just the one-off? Are they just something we have to do once in a while, but we get to really follow our passions and tap into this? And a lot of teachers are like, yeah, it is a lot. It's a lot of tax forms in our school, right? Like that's it. And like, it's not just, by the way, it's not like teachers are doing this to students, it's administrators doing this to teachers. And part of that too is really, how do we actually help our kids find their passions, even though we still got to teach the curriculum? And that's why, like, I talk about this notion of innovating inside the box. Unfortunately, we work in constraints in education, and in reality, Apple works in constraints. Like Apple has a budget. It might be $20 billion, but they have constraints that they have to work within. And so how do you actually create innovative ideas within those constraints? So it's kind of like saying, yeah, I need this kid to understand this content, but they want to be a YouTuber. Can I actually leverage that? Or they're excited, and that when they actually have to do the tax form, it's not as bad. But if they just do the tax forms, of course, they're going to be cause issues. Of course, they're going to have problems, right? So I want these kids, when they're walking out of school, not to be really good at school, but really good at learning, really good at finding their passions and purpose in life. And that to me is really kind of how you bring that out.
I love that. And it actually makes me think of something that I want to share with you, because your book inspired me. I think I told you last spring to make some changes in my teachings as a college physical educator. And one of them that I want to share with you is throughout the course of my, for example, like my fitness conditioning class, you're not just there to give them the tools, different types of workouts or, education of, how to be healthy, how to be active, what to eat, all that stuff. But hopefully you're there to inspire them to be autonomous, right? Because I'm not going to be with them their whole life. Hopefully I'm also inspiring them to be creative, innovative, because they're going to have to design their own workouts, whether that's at some point in my class or in their everyday life. And so what I do with one of my courses is I have them actually, by the end of this semester, they actually create a presentation where they show off a workout that they are really proud of. And some of the ideas that they come up with are just incredible, whether it's on mobility focused or whether it is on, a HIIT training workout. And sometimes like they gamify, it challenges and team challenges. But anyways, the reason why I'm bringing that up is it goes with the fact of how do we really, spark that innovation and creativity? And it creates like the class, I find, from what I've got, like the feedback from my students, a way more meaningful, memorable experience.
It's amazing because, like, no offense to you, but this is actually me too. Too often in education, what we've done is we've limited the learning to the knowledge of the teacher. Whereas what you did is you expanded it to the wisdom of the classroom, right? So like ideas that might not necessarily be better than the things that you're doing, but they're totally different than things you'd have done. And you're like, well, that's actually amazing. Like I would have never thought of that because I just don't think that way. And then all of a sudden you're becoming better through that process as well. Is one of the reasons I actually talk about how we need to shift from engagement to empowerment, because as you said, the kids are going to eventually you're not going to be around, right? You're going to, if they need you to learn when they leave, you're in trouble. You haven't done your job. How do you get them to figure out how they can move forward without you? That is the key. And so that's a beautiful example of what you just shared. And that is the whole purpose of what we're trying to do.
Absolutely. Yeah. George, something that I want to move to, I know you are someone that believe in, quality questions. And I'm curious to ask, for the benefit of all my listeners that are tuning in, what are some prompts or critical questions that we could ask ourselves to become more innovative?
I think the biggest question for me when we talk about innovation is like, what am I going to do with this information? Right. So for me, when I read a book, there is an opportunity. And this is actually one of the characteristics of the innovator's mindset is talking about reflection. Right. So I am really big. Like I actually just started doing this. I started capturing at the end of my runs. I've been doing these like little run reflections, just like what I was thinking about. And so I actually been listening to Audible books. And so one of the things I've really struggled with Audible, and I know this sounds weird, is because it's harder to capture quotes, right? So like if I'm reading a book, I can take a picture of it. I can, if I'm reading on Kindle, I can highlight it. It will like save it for me. And it's something I really love, but I do not want to stop the middle of a run to actually like write down a quote. Cause I'm an old guy and I'm a big guy. And so once it stopped, I don't want to start again. So what I've been doing is I've actually, at the end of my runs, I've been just popping up Instagram and doing a story and just talking about like something I learned and something I picked up. But what I've been doing is I've been creating them as highlights to actually like, hey, here's something I heard in this book. And this is what, just something I think, and here's how it applies to me. Like today, I talked about one of the things it's about actually finding peak performance without going to burnout. Because a lot of times, and it's actually like, it's interesting because I know this really well, because I actually, after my talk or after I listen to it, I do a little 1-minute walk to my house. So I always, stop about a minute so I can throw out my phone and actually reflect on it. And so what they said was stress plus rest equals growth. So I remember this. And so it was like saying, basically, if you're like a high level athlete and all you do is like work out, push, you actually don't grow because your body needs recovery time to actually develop the muscles. Right. And he said the same thing for your mind. You need to be able to step away from stuff. You need to like be able to like catch yourself. So I talked about this when you're thinking about homework and education. So they're not talking about school. They're just talking about this concept. So then I said, okay, so like we have think about this in the context of the homework debate, right? Kids at school, pushing, learning. And then as soon as they go home, they got to start doing homework. So it's like, so if stress plus rest equals growth, stress plus stress equals burnout. And so don't just think about this in homework, think about what we're doing to education. So why can I talk about this right now? Because I actually took out my phone, did a little walk, and then I actually saved those in my highlights. And here's the weird thing about when I do this stuff, because a lot of people, they do this to like get attention, whatever. And I'm not saying like, I don't like getting likes and all that stuff. I'm not pretending that. But I always look at my social media as a diary to my kids, that one day my kids are going to be able to look at everything I did on social media, and they'll be able to, so like, I'm very thoughtful of how I interact, how I connect with other people, how I have conversations, because I know my kids will be able to look at it one day. They're not looking at it right now, but 10, 15 years from now. And so there's some lessons there, but also it's partly at some point, I'm going to go through all those run reflections I've highlighted. I'm going to take that reflection and then I'm going to blog about it. And then I'm going to, or do a podcast on it. And I'm like saving that stuff too. So it's not just, it's really kind of when you look at information, what am I doing with this? And how do I make my own connections? I think that to me is a really important concept. And if you just embrace that one question, you will see exponential growth, because because I stopped and took that's just part of who I am now. That's just part of my thinking. That's just part of that stress. plus rest equals growth is going to be part of my vocabulary, because I didn't just listen to it and just ignore it. When I was done, I reflected, I created it, I made my own connections. I think that's a really powerful way to move forward.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, no, I find like your mental fitness practices that you're
Mm-hmm.
currently doing that you just shared with us are really important to do. To
Totally.
take that moment to reflect, take that moment to ask a better question to get a better answer, to be more intentional, purposeful in terms of in your life. And it's cool too that you want to pass it on to your children, right? In terms of your legacy, and not only your children, but there's probably other people too, George, that admire your work, or who follow you on Instagram, and you don't realize it could be that one, post that you do that has an impact on them, right? So I want to go to another question, which is related to this. I know your father has had a significant impact on your life, and I know you consider him one of your greatest mentors. I believe you spoke about him in your TED Talk in 2013 there. So what is one lesson that he taught you that you want to share with my audience?
Yeah. So my both my parents actually they lived in small villages in Greece. It's called the Peloponnesus. It's actually on the coast. It's one of the most beautiful areas in the world, and it's awesome. If you ever go to Greece, people go to the islands all the time. This to me is better than the islands because it's all the amenities of living by the water, but people don't go there because they want to go to the islands, but it's right on the sea. So they actually lived maybe about a 25-30 minute drive from each other, but they're not driving at that time. That's like, a couple days by donkey, right? Like that. So they actually met in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, if you can believe that, even though they live very close to each other. So when they actually came to Canada, they both came over on different occasions on a boat. Neither of them could speak English or French. Neither of them had any money. And they basically came because they saw opportunities that they didn't have, and how do they actually leverage them. And so my parents basically went from not having the ability to read and write any language. Both of them learned how to read and write English. They had no money when they came here. They actually ended up owning a restaurant for 30 plus years. And what they taught me is that change and opportunity to do something amazing. That to me is like one of the key ways that I actually live, is really not only how do we deal with change that's happening, but how do we initiate change? Like COVID for me, and we were talking about this earlier, was something that was thrust upon myself, right? It was thrust upon my family, as it was for everyone. But I also saw that as like, hey, this is forcing me to do things in a different way. And so am I going to just fight it, or am I going to actually leverage this? Am I going to actually leverage that I have different time to work on things I've said I've never been able to work on? And not everyone's in this space, right? Like how I looked at, my fitness. I've been saying, like, if I just had routine, if I could just have some routine, right, then I would be able to eat healthier. So now I'm like, hey, you got no excuse. You got to eat healthier, right? So I started doing that. And what's interesting is now I'm back on the road, and now I'm doing this, and I make my routine work on the road because I've like learned those skills, that process. And it's because I actually just didn't, deal with the change that was thrown at me. I actually, created something. And a quote that I'm known for, and it's something we talk about in education, is like, you need to take risks, right? And people don't really like, what do you mean by risk? Like, do you mean jumping off buildings? Like, do you mean something inherently dangerous? And so I said, okay, what does that even mean when we say this? And so I define risk as moving from a comfortable average in pursuit of an unknown better, right? So you think about this in the context of your personal life. A lot of people can connect with this, right? And I've done this before, like have stayed in a relationship way too long, right? Like you're like, why didn't you go? Right? Well, because I don't want to move my stuff, right? It's going to be kind of a hassle, blah, blah, blah. I got to get, change of address and stuff like that. And then you leave, and then you're like, why didn't I do that sooner? Right. And so we're risk averse in that sense of like living with that comfortable average. We're doing that personally. And so professionally, like we can do that as well. We'll stick with a practice. Like probably before you did what you shared in your class, you're probably doing the same thing. You're like, yeah, this works. But then you said, okay, but I want to try something new. And then you're like, oh, wow, like I should have done this like 5-10 years ago. Right. And you start thinking that way. And so when my parents came here, they had a good life in Greece, right? And it was a different life, right? But my parents went out to seek something better for them. And as we mentioned, I lived in Edmonton, And Edmonton was good. I enjoyed it, and it was good. And could I have lived there till I died? Yeah, probably. But I was just kind of like, yeah, I'm stagnant. We got to go. Like it's time to go. And now that I'm here, part of it is like I'm struggling finding routines, but I'm figuring that out because I wanted my routines to be different. Because I'm like, I need to like push myself, and I need to like, gravitate something. And I don't think that I could have made such a significant move um, without my parents, mindset that they instilled in me. And also, what I find fascinating, not only could I have not have done it, but I also realized how much easier it was for me to like move to a new country where I was able to financially do it, where my parents came over with nothing and would at the time had no idea if they'd ever talk to their own family again. Like we're not talking, like phones were not a thing, right? And think about that. So it's like part of it too is that some of the risks we take are not near the risks our families take. And so I always try to put that in perspective. Like, hey, this is scary, but I couldn't have done what my parents did. So it's not that bad. And so I think part of that too is really kind of learning and watching and seeing that impact. My parents were willing to try new things because they wanted something not only better for themselves, but for their kids. And that's really kind of what drives me as well.
I love that. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that lesson from your parents. Definitely really powerful. And it also shows too that they had a very open lens, of how they see the world and how they pass it on to you. And sometimes we don't know with our own personal biases what we're missing out until we actually see, right? Until we try, until we go. And something that I want to move to, George, is the purpose of this show is to inspire millions of people across the world to achieve greatness and enhance their overall personal well-being. So what is your definition of greatness?
I think for me, greatness is defined by yourself, right? Like I said, I think the way I want to see greatness is I want to live a life with purpose. I want to know that those closest to me, I've helped them in some way to achieve something great. I can actually credit a lot of this to, I had a principal, her name was Kelly Wilkins. And I was like so jaded with education. I hated it. And I was like, I'm going to quit at the end of this year. And then I was like, well, what am I going to do? Like, there's nothing else I'm ready to do. And so I actually applied for a job, got a job at Kelly's school. And I'm like, I'm going to give it one more year. And then I can't do this. And what was amazing about her is that, she brought out something in me that was there that I didn't know. Right. And she didn't just do that for me. She did it with so many other people. Like anyone who went to that school, they either became like the best teacher ever in that school, or they went on to like leadership positions, or, basically everyone she helped people find their purpose. And I think I only worked there for a year, and then she pushed me into becoming an assistant principal in another school. And I was like, here I am about to quit, and now I'm going into admin, like basically 1 year turnaround, because she brought that out in me. So I think when we're talking about greatness, when I look at it, it's kind of the same thing that you're doing with this podcast, is how do we actually create a legacy that inspires others to go on to find their greatness. That to me is really where and I know you're not supposed to use the definition of a word in the definition of the word. But I think that to me is a very personal thing, helping people find what their purpose is, what their excitement is. And one of the things I'm really proud of is a lot of people I've connected with. We have our own publishing company. They've written books that they didn't know they had in them until one day I said, you should start writing. You got something really powerful to share. And seeing that and having a pride in watching their success. And I said this, if I can do 1/10 of what Kelly Wilkins has done in her lifetime, I consider myself a tremendous success. And how do I help other people find what they're passionate about, what they're excited about? Is why I'm so passionate about what I talk about with not only my kids, but every kid that enters our schools. How do you help them find success in a way that is meaningful to them, not in a way that we define for them, in a way that is meaningful to them? And that to me is ultimately greatness.
I think it really hits on, like personalizing, right, to each individual, right? Because there's not a one size fits all formula. I think something that was key that you said in that is the impact that someone can have, right, through a conversation or through leadership or through maybe this conversation that we're having right now, to kind of bring out that greatness that's already within someone, right? So no, I appreciate you for sharing that story, and I hope Kelly tunes in, to hear about, the impact that she had on you.
Tell her all the time she's sick of hearing it. Okay, just so you know, like, you didn't just change my life professionally, you changed it personally too. And she's like, I know. Which is, like, is a credit to her. She wants you to do well, and that's her, that's where she gets her happiness from, just watching other people do well. She doesn't want the credit for it. She just basically said, a lot of people say like, oh, like, I wouldn't be able to have done this without, your help. And I'm like, no. I just gave you some advice. You took it. Like, you had to do the hard part. I just said a couple things, right? Like, you actually doing the work is where that power is. And so you kind of see that side of it too, right? And so that to me is like, you're just trying to find that one little thing that person is passionate about, and then for them, they at the end of the day, they gotta, as we teach with our kids, what we were talking about earlier, they have to go with it. They have to figure that out, because you can't hold their hand through the process. They gotta jump on it. And so I've been blessed to connect myself with a lot of people that are, move from thoughts to actions, which I absolutely love. That's
awesome, George. Who is a future guest that you would like to see on this show?
Oh, on this show, I know you've had some interesting past guests. We were talking about that too. I would love for you to maybe talk. Maybe I'm not going to say that. I would love for you to maybe talk to some. Maybe you could do like a round table with some politicians from different sides, and seeing how they view the future there in Canada, and maybe having that conversation. It'd be kind of interesting to, bring people together. And that to me is something that's really important, is like, how do we actually bridge people in a time where it's so easily to be divided? So I don't know if I'd give you one guess, but maybe I'd give you two, but I'm not going to say who, but I'm sure people can figure it out. Just, we need to bring people together. I think that to me is a really important aspect of how we connect with one another. And I think a lot of times we're influenced by people we shouldn't necessarily be influenced in the way they interact, because they're what they do in the world. But I'm really big on how do we create a world that we bring people together so they can find their own way forward. That to me is a really important aspect, not how do we pit people against each other.
Take you on that challenge. I'll do my best, because so far it's always been one-on-one interviews or solo episodes of myself. So it'd be cool if we did something like that. So I take you on it. So George, you've been so gracious with your time. Where's the best place for my listeners to connect with you online?
Yeah, you can find me at georgecouros.ca. I haven't changed it over to georgecouros.us yet. So I'm still holding on to the Canadian, URL. So that's where you find my stuff. My own podcast, The Innovator's Mindset. And it's funny because I talk a lot about innovation. I have guests on myself, but I'll do some solo podcasts. I'll do some book reviews. I did a thing last couple of years. I've been doing a thing called Mindset Monday. And I just talk about like, hey, how have I shifted my mindset? There's short episodes. And it's just a way to kind of, I like to use these spaces to try different things. Not just to kind of do the same podcast over and over again, but say like, hey, how do I use a space? And I think for me, a lot of times when people are a lot of people focus on branding and, getting, likes on social media and stuff like that. I've always seen these as spaces to share our learning. And that to me is what I try to do, is try to do different things, try to grow. That's why I'm like, that's why I'm trying ChatGPT, right? Seeing what does that look like and trying to figure it out, because the best way to understand our students is to be one. And to really kind of understand what learning looks like from their point of view. And so if you want to, people are like scared of it. I'm like, hey, you can be scared of it, or you can start using it and see like, how can I leverage this? And if I can understand that from that viewpoint, probably better able to help my students in our process as well. So all those places, if you Google me, George Couros, you'll find everything.
Awesome, George. And I just want to take this last little moment to really thank you for being here. Thank you for being so generous with your time, sharing your experience, your wisdom, and most importantly, like your big heart.
Thanks for having me on the podcast. So it's great. And I look forward to seeing that collab that you do in the future too.
Thank you for listening to the Living Your Greatness podcast. If this show has added some value, don't be shy to subscribe, leave a rating, and make a review.